Okay. Now,
okay. So this is for refuah, for Yitzchak Yehuda ben Miriam. We should have a first Shlema and a speedy recovery and really be released from hospital as soon as possible.
Amen.
So continuing the theme about davening not in the normal way. So if one can sit or stand depending on the situation, both methods are acceptable and permissible under the circumstances. So if here there's the question here, example, where one can either daven before the journey and before the optimum time, but standing, or daven at the optimal time during the journey, but while seated, which option should he choose? So it says the poskim maintain that since concentration during davening is extremely important, and the average traveler will find it difficult to have kavana while davening on the road, even in a sitting position, it's preferable to daven before the trip and before the optimum time. That is before the time the earliest time you could say Shema. That's what they mean, the optimum time. And tefillin. But if you don't have any choice, I think this goes to intention, and you want to, if you can't do it, it's not it's beyond your control. And it says, if one has a choice, this is the heading, if one will arrive at his destination or somewhere along the way where he can daven while standing and the time for davening has not yet passed, it is preferable to wait and daven while standing than to daven while seated. Lechatchila, one should daven before Sof Zman Tefillah, which is a third of the day. That's biblical hours. One who does so not only receives reward for davening, but also davening at the correct time. Okay, I didn't know that. There's a special schut for davening during the time, because by midday, if you start davening at 12 o'clock, it's too late. So I think we all hopefully fall into that category. But if he missed optimum time, he is still permitted to daven until chatzot, which is halachic noon, not 12 o'clock. The hours, it's a calculation of what midday is biblically. However, in this case, he'll only receive reward for davening. Therefore, if one will only be able to daven while standing after Zof Zman Tefillah, which is the optimal time for praying, after it has passed, it is better to daven during the journey while seated in order to receive the reward of davening during the proper time.
So how we ended off last time was the proof whereby, if you remember that a buyer had a case where he said that rubbers can't be conclusively proved that when a human does damage, he pays in relation to what he damaged and not in a field 60 times larger, because there was an omission both in terms of peoples and animals. Okay, so now we're on the next section. We're on the 59th daf. Congratulations, we actually hit the 59th daf. And we're at the point where Rav Yossi Haglili ruled in the preceding brisa, one who damaged unripe grain pays for what it would have been worth at harvest time had it been allowed to grow. Now this view is equated with another Tana. Abaya said, Rav Yossi Haglili and Rabbi Yishmael said the same thing. The opinion of Rav Yossi Haglili is the one that we just stated. Rav Yishmael also subscribed to the view as taught in the brisa. The Torah stated that if one's animal caused damage by eating or trampling another's produce, he shall pay his choicest field or his choicest vineyard. That comes straight out of Shemot, chapter 22, verse 4. So we learned this. I don't know if, guys, you remember 6b and 7a, we were discussing the possessive noun his. Is it referring to the damaged parties' fields in terms of the highest, best quality vineyard or field, or is it talking about the damage's best field? Do you remember that discussion with Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva? I'm sure you remember it. So, as you remember, Rav Yishmael sees the possessive pronoun as referring to the damaged party. Do you remember Rabbi Akiva was the opposite? So the way you read it is the damaged party's choicest field or the damaged party's choicest vineyard, were the words of Rabbi Yishmael. But Rabbi Akiva said, Chumash comes only to authorize the court to collect for those who sustain damage from the damager's own superior land. And this is certainly true where the Torah collects for the temple treasury. Now, you remember there was a discussion where even if you were going according to Rabbi Akiva and you're talking about the damager's land, does it have to be the well, if you talk about Rabbi Yishmael and a combination of Rabbi Akiva, you could say that it's the choicest property of the damager in relation to the best property of the damaged, which means if the damaged party has superior land, the damager need only match that land. But then that still goes according to the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, because Rabbi Akiva turns around and says, listen, it has to be of the damager's best property irrespective. So we remember that we're not talking about anything other than value. So sometimes what you'll have, say you've got 8 hectares of the lowest grade land. Then you've got 4 hectares of the medium grade land, and you've got 2 hectares of the top quality producing field or land. Now, they're all worth the same amount of money. They're all worth 1 million rand, for example, which is worth nothing at all. Let's make it $1 million. Okay.
Also, speak quickly. It's also not going to be worth long for long.
Exactly. I have to speak quickly when we talk about rand because it crashes as we speak. Very salient point, Gavin. I have to see the cat flying. So what we're saying here basically is you're not talking about a difference in value. We talked about the choicest property, Kevin, in order to sell it quickly so that the damaged party can recover their money, because everybody will jump at the choicest property of land in order to buy it, and therefore the damaged party will get his money quickly. In any event, Rabbi Akiva says we pay for property that was damaged to the temple's property, even though it doesn't say damage to his fellow, whereas the other sages turn around and say, look, to his fellow means only your fellow Jew. Okay, but let's not go back to that Mishnah. The point that this it brings in 59a2 is that Rabbi Yishmael seems to mean that the damager pays the value of the victim's choicest land, even if he damaged a less valuable parcel. Okay, and what do we mean is that if the animal ate the produce of a low-yielding plot, the damager must pay how much a high-yielding plot of the same size would depreciate should its produce be consumed, because we initially don't know what land was eaten. Was the plot of high quality or low quality? If we're not sure, the opinion is that we do the choicest property. Okay, now does this make sense, yes or no, guys? And if so, why? And if not, why?
Repeat the question, please.
Okay, so Rabbi Yishmael seems to mean that the damager pays the value of the victim's choicest land, even if he damaged a less valuable parcel of land. So in other words, if you don't know, you cover the damaged party by paying a higher value of land. So it doesn't end up being out of pocket if you don't know.
So why should he pay? Why should he pay the higher if he damaged the lower quality land? He should reimburse for the land that was damaged, not pay the higher.
Okay,
like for like.
So Kevin's right in the fact that there is a discussion that we obviously can't mean that if we know he damaged a lower property of land, that we make him pay a higher property value, because this is, I'll give you a source for this. If you look at the Moira of Idi Baravin, he agrees with Kevin, or should I say Kevin agrees with him, is that basically if you know that the animal ate in a poorer bed, you don't make the damager pay from a richer bed or higher value yielding bed. So that you're in good company, Kevin. So
can I just add something?
Yeah.
So I actually quite like Rabbi Akiva, and I'll tell you why, because you then limit it to your best quality land, which might be you might have destroyed this guy's property's quality land, which is worth 10 times what your quality land is worth. So by limiting it to your quality land makes more sense, limiting it to the damages land as opposed to the damaged party's land. Because the damaged party might be a much richer guy.
Okay, so let me play Rabbi Yishmael's advocate here. I would say to you that, and I'm not arguing with Rabbi Akiva, I'm just giving you a different point of view, that what would make sense is whatever you damaged, you replace. In other words, why should we be paid on the damager? What does it have to do with the damager? If you destroyed something with X, you should pay X. And that's what we're trying to determine here. So Kevin's right. You don't make somebody pay for a rich bed of produce if you know for sure they damaged a poor area of bed. But
your property might be in Santon, whereby the damaged party's land is only in Orange Grove. His best properties in Orange Grove, the other guys in Santon.
But you've got to see this as not the value in terms of suburb. You've got to see this in an agrarian culture where you're talking about pure agriculture here. And the thing of it is you need to determine it from an agricultural-based value, not in terms of perceived value in area, because that gives you a false sense of economy, because it's easy to calculate in which suburb something was damaged. We're talking about here productivity yield and qualitative yield. That's all we talk about in a field or vineyard, which means if a particular field gives you a good Chardonnay, that's hard to come by. There's a problem because that's not your clip drift, that you get it from. It's a little bit different. Rav Idi Baravin said that where Rav Yishmael refers to where the animal ate from a bed among other beds in the victim's field, and we do not know whether it was the produce of a rich bed or a poor bed. In other words, whether it's a high or low yield. So he's agreeing with Kevin that you don't automatically make somebody pay from a rich bed if they ate from a poor. But what he's saying is when you don't know, you pay from a rich bed just to cover the damaged party. Now, what do you guys have to say about that? We've covered this. I just want to see if you remember.
You're going to have to give me that question again. I'm sure I can answer it.
Okay. So I'm saying when you don't know whether it's a rich or poor bed and you cover the damaged party by paying from the richer bed, that's what the interpretation is of the Moira Rav Idi Baravin, who's explaining Rav Yishmael. But if you know for sure that your animal ate from a lower qualitative field or bed, then there for sure you pay the low amount. But when you don't know, you cover the damaged party, and just to be sure. Now, what do you have to say about that?
Fair.
Yeah, probably fair. I mean, if you don't
know,
not fair because
the court should investigate fully and give someone fair due process.
Because you
fair judgment. Yeah.
But you're also selling at retail prices, not wholesale prices, to the guy. And you got to take in perspective the whole bigger field, not just the little area.
Okay, so just put that area aside. Arthur is right. That is a broader context issue, but this is just to say, whichever way, whether you look at it times 60 or you look at it microcosmically just within that plot of land, either way, if you're not sure if it ate from a richer or poorer bed, if you're not sure, obviously if you're sure you pay from the quality of bed, it ate. But do you cover the damaged party just to be sure from the higher quality bed, or do you make sure the damaged party has a loss, or do you make sure that the damager doesn't overpay? What do you do?
Surely you have to determine what that damaged part is, because it sounds like you don't know which land whether it was a good land or a bad land, which means you don't even know what the size of the damage is. You don't even know where the damage is. It sounds bizarre.
Okay, so what we're saying is as follows, is that Gavin's bringing up a good point. I also found it bizarre because, for one reason, firstly, I'm not a farmer, so I don't know what the heck they're talking about. And number two, if you know that a particular little plot of land is high yield. So you know it's high yield because it's missing. If it's from a poor part of the land, you can see it's missing. So how do you get confused?
Yeah.
How do you get confused?
And also, surely you can see the quality of the land just by looking at the surrounding crops, because.
So we're not sure, because we might have to wait until. That's why it says he sees it according to Rav Yossi Haglili. It says you wait until it's harvested to know how the quality turned out. So that's a separate point. That's why Rabbi Yishmael, that's the point Abai is bringing. But let's go back to this point. The point of it is that we did learn a principle that if I say I've got a garage, and in that garage that you burnt down, there's a Porsche, and you need to pay for a Porsche, your question would be, prove it, because otherwise I'm going to pay for a Volkswagen. In other words, the onus is on the person, on the claimant, to prove what was damaged. Does that make sense? I can't extract money from my fellow unless I prove and have evidence to support my case. Otherwise, everybody would go around taking money from his fellow without evidence. So
Damon,
yeah.
I agree with the rabbi on the one that it should be when it's actually in fruition, because technically, if your animal's eaten it before that, he hasn't lost anything yet anyway, because he couldn't sell it right now. So it's not like you have to pay him right now for the damages. So later on, you get more. That's just my fault.
Okay,
it's
so
not like a car that's damaged that you had already fully fruit.
Okay, so what Arthur's saying is that if you don't wait for it to fully ripen, you've actually really hurt the damaged party, because he's lost. The amount he's going to get is negligible for unripe grains or stalks or whatever, without the fruit coming to be worth anything, especially if you take it in the context of time 60. The damaged party's really lost a lot, and the Gemara's grappling with this very issue. So let me just cover a little bit of ground. It said, and do not say that Rabbi Yishmael meant, as Rav Idi Baravin said, that when the animal ate from a bed among other beds in the victim's field, and we do not know whether it was the produce of a rich bed or poor bed that was eaten. In that case, Rabbi Yishmael tells the damager, go pay the damaged party for the produce of a rich bed, based on the value of the best bed there is now. Now, this isn't Rav Yishmael's intent. That's what the Gemara is saying. There's a problem with this, because there's the rule that the burden of proof is upon the one who seeks to extract property from his fellow. Okay, that was in 46b. Okay, and we even covered it in 6b and 7a. So in other words, if you want to sue somebody for money, you have to prove at what value they're damaged to. That's the bottom line. There has to be evidence. So a buyer therefore gives a different explanation of Rav Yishmael's ruling. What does he say? He says basically like Arthur does, that Rabbi Yishmael means that the damages are based on the bed's choicest value later on. And what is this later value? It corresponds to the value of this bed when the produce is ready to be removed. In other words, it's harvested. So in other words, the damager pays the amount by which the bed's price at harvest time would be reduced because of the missing produce. So according to this interpretation, Rabbi Yishmael basically sees it like Rav Yossi Haglili. In other words, the choicest value. When is the choicest value? When it's ripened, as Arthur said, or it's ready to be harvested. That's according to Rashi. So if we remember on 6b, there was a different explanation of Rav Yishmael. It basically said that the damager need not pay more than the greater quality of the best choicest land of the victim's property. So if the damager had medium quality land, but it was still the best produce of the damaged party, that would suffice. But obviously Rabbi Akiva said no, it has to correspond with the damager's choice property. Okay, so basically in Gittin 48b, a buyer subscribes to Rabbi Yishmael's interpretation. So therefore we're saying that this is a particular interpretation of Rav Yishmael. It was a little bit different to the Gemara. But Rabbi Yishmael, according to Abai, is making 2 points, guys. That the land used for payment need not be of a better quality than the victim's best. Okay, no matter which way you see it. So, and then the second thing of it is, as Arthur said, the damages are assessed according to what the land would have been worth at harvest time. Okay, so that Arthur answers Arthur's question. So again, you need evidence in terms of what was damaged qualitatively, if it's a higher producing field or a low producing field. But either way, you have to see what that quality of land would have been worth on fruition. And remember, Rabbi Yishmael, well, Rav Yossi Aglili turned around and said, if the grain was damaged by some sort of pestilence or drought, etc., and it never was valued at anything, it's the damages gain. So there is, but it's worth it for the damaged party, because at the end of the day, if his field hadn't matured, I don't think he'd get very much, especially in a context of 1 in 60. So Arthur, well done. I think you did right there. Okay. Now, guys, did I lose you at any point?
No.
All right, so let's just go on. Master said, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Shimon. Now, just to bear in mind, Rabbi Shimon said at the end of the Mishnah, if it's ripe produce and you damage a se'ah, you pay for a full se'ah at what it was like harvested. And if you damage 2 se'ah, you pay for 2 se'ah. So that's the Mishnah's opinion on Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda said in the name of Rabbi Shimon a different opinion that differs with our Mishnah. So it says, in what case were these words, namely that the damaged produce is evaluated together with the land stated, where the animal ate shoots of grapevines or shoots of fig trees? Okay, so that means is that according to Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, is that you can only call it ripe produce as a market-related picked value, as though the fruit were picked when it's ripe. But when it's still in the developmental state of being shoots and not even the fruit discernible, then you look at it within the plot of the land 60 times larger, because it's still attached to the ground. Why? Because why would you detach it from the ground if it hadn't ripened? There's no point. Nobody's going to buy it, Arthur.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So then you get an inference from this. What's the inference from Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda's statement? But it implies if it ate budding grapes, we view them as though they were grapes ready to be picked. Okay? Which means the Brisa talks about 3 stages of growth. And these are the order of development. So the first thing is you've got shoots of vines, where nothing is discernible in them. Then you've got budding grapes, which is smadar. And then you've got half-ripe grapes, which is boser. Okay? So those are your stages. It is leaving out one particular stage, which we'll grapple with. But those are, in principle, the 3 stages. So what it's saying then is that in the case of budding grapes, we view how much the land was worth before the damage and how much it was worth afterwards, and the damager pays the difference. How can these 2 implications be reconciled? So what we have is a contradiction, because on the one hand, he's saying, look, if there is basically just green shoots, we pay it in context of the land, but the minute it starts to bud, we pay it as though they were grapes ready to be picked. But then there's a contradicting view that we see how much the land was worth before and after, and we see it in greater context with the field. According to, so it would seem like a contradiction. So the only one that can resolve this is Ravina, who says bundle the cases together. In other words, what we do is you take the case of budding grapes, which is smother, along with the other cases, and you come up with this particular teaching. In what cases were these words, namely that the damaged produce is evaluated with the land, where the animal ate shoots of grapevines or shoots of fig trees? But if it ate budding grapes, half-ripe figs, or half-ripe grapes, we view them as though they are grapes ready to be picked. In other words, according to Ravina, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda puts budding grapes, smadar, in the same category as half-ripe grapes, boser, and he treats them both as if they were fully ripe. Now, Ravina basically derived this explanation from the Brisa. And how did he? Because the Brisa implies that Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda disagrees with the sages. Because the sages, if you remember, they evaluate smada, budding grapes, as unripe produce, because you can't do anything with it. So obviously, if it brings the opinion separately of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, it treats it as ripe produce. That's according to Tosfot. So under that interpretation, Rabbi Shimon maintains that budding grapes are regarded as though they are ready to be picked. So the Gemara asks, how is that so? Because if Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda is the same of Rabbi Yeshua, who considers budding grapes as though they are ready to be picked. So again, you've got Rav Yossi Aglili, who talks about grain. Okay, then you've got this issue of Rabbi Yeshua that talks about budding grapes, and said we take them as though they're ready to be harvested. And we're saying that Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda has that same opinion, that when they're in the smother stage, that budding grapes, where you can discern the grapes, they're ready to be harvested. So why bring his opinion now? Why not just say that according to Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, budding grapes is considered as though the produce is ready to be picked, and the sages say the opposite? Why is it bringing him as distinctly different now if he's holding by the same opinion? That's what the Gemara wants to know, Kev. They're saying, why are they bringing him as a separate issue? If he's in agreement, why not bring their names together? So there is an issue at stake. They don't agree on everything, because the issue is that we consider the weakening of the vine in assessing the damages. But the attribution of the opinions is not specified. So in other words, Gavin, you did Chazorah, what is the weakening of the vine?
Weakening of the vine.
Yeah.
I did Chazorah, but I'm not sure about this.
Okay.
Is it? I don't know.
Okay.
Is that when the grapes are ready to fall off or ready to be picked?
No. So what we're saying is, yes, they both agree that budding grapes are worked out as produce ready to be picked as though they were ripe, but they disagree as far as whose opinion is what. Because we're going to come and find out that Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda takes into account one leniency that Rabbi Yeshua doesn't, and that is the weakening of the vine. So what is this weakening of the vine? Is that basically, had the grapes remained on the vine, they would have weakened it by drawing nourishment from the entire time until they are picked. So the damager prevented a loss to the victim that would otherwise be sustained. So you basically have to deduct that amount from the damager's payment. So let me give you a perfect example. I'm a car thief and I take your car, and they arrest me and they want me to pay for the car. And before they issue that I owe Arthur for the car that I've stolen, they turn around to me and they say, "Do you have anything to say?" I said, "Yes. I want you to deduct the money that Arthur paid for insurance, would have paid for insurance for the last 6 months, because he doesn't have a car. So I saved him that. So therefore, deduct that from what I owe Arthur. I saved him on insurance." They said, "But yes, you're guilty." I said, "I know I'm guilty, but I still saved him that money," which is true. So what we do, Kev, is we take into account money saved, because if the vine is weakened, it means a lower quality harvest. It means that the next year around, it would be some nutritional depletion, because the grapes draw the energy source from the vine, which means during all that time of growth that the vine becomes weaker. So you have to take into account that leniency for the damager. You have to take into account everything, basically. Okay, so the Gemara now says, how do we attribute the opinions? Abaya said elsewhere the attribution of opinion is specified. Which Tana takes into account the weakening of the vine? It's Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, as it was taught in the Brisa. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh, one who violates a woman does not pay for the pain, because she would have ultimately suffered this pain under her husband. Okay, so what it's talking about here, it's a bit of a hectic topic, But what it's saying that obviously you pay for tsar, pain. It's one of the 5 categories of payment that a person pays another person when you injure somebody. But according to Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, if a rapist or a seducer violates a virgin, he doesn't pay for the pain she would have suffered, because he preempted her experiencing this pain under her husband. What do we mean? Is that the husband, if he was with his wife, with her for the first time, he would have obviously ruptured her hymen, because it would have been the first time that they had intercourse. And basically, he pays for any other pain that's associated with the assault. In other words, he threw it to the ground, if he gave her bruise marks or whatever, because she wouldn't be treated that way by her husband. But the actual breakage of the hymen would have been an eventual damage or rupturing that she would have experienced under her husband. So therefore, since it's an eventuality, he doesn't have to pay for that as an added payment. Okay. Now, the sages don't agree with him. Okay. On what aspect? Well, they basically say a virgin who cohabits willingly is not comparable to one who cohabits under coercion. Hence, the violator must indeed compensate for the pain. So they actually are saying, look, at the end of the day, when a woman is more relaxed and the husband's a little bit nervous, he's going to be a lot more gentle. It's not going to exactly be a forced entry with somebody that's biologically very stiff and resisting. So the amount of rupturing and damage will probably be a little bit less, as well as psychologically. But they're actually not disagreeing with Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda's premise, because what they're saying is we agree that there doesn't have to be restitution for a loss that would have been sustained in any event. They're not arguing with that. The only point that they're making is that since a woman would have suffered greater pain when she was violated against her will, then with her husband and her consent and his gentleness, that the person that seduced her, forced himself upon her, would have to pay for that. Okay, but at any rate, it doesn't matter, because it's established that Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda takes into account a potential benefit that the victim will enjoy in the future. So if you look at our case, the Tana who reduces the damages payment on account of the benefit to the victim's barn, while its dispute in Rabbi Yeshua does not make a deduction. So in other words, Rabbi Yeshua is saying, I'm not going to take off the weakening with barn. Rabbi Yeshua, so Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda is saying, yes, we have to take off every bit of damage and benefit and work the calculation out exactly. So that's the bone of contention. By the way, we've got 6 minutes left. Arthur, don't laugh. How are you going to laugh? Don't laugh.
I just wanted to say something, Damon.
No, but don't. Okay, we got
to
edit
it. It's good. It's good. It's not dirty in any way.
Okay.
I mean, about the thing where, you say to the guy, but, I helped you, take it for what my animal ate. It's 20 miles. You'll probably be like Damon, to be like you. And you owe me.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
helping with your mind.
Okay, guys, we've got 6 minutes left. I have to just quickly cover this ground.
So you're saying, Damon,
yeah,
it's like they're using that example because to reduce the damage, like the rapist is a damager, to reduce his penalty that he'd have to pay because the husband would have done it.
Yeah, what they're saying is that no, he doesn't have to pay that added sar, the added penalty of pain.
Yeah, so he gets a reduction, like a discount.
Well, it's not a reduction. You just wouldn't have to pay that addition. In that case, it's about an additional payment. In our case, it's about a reduction for the benefit of the weakening of the vine not being occurring, because the budding grapes never needed to draw energy from the vine. Okay, let me just cover the last point a second. The opinion is ascribed to other Tanaim as well. Abaya said these Tanaim, and Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda said the same thing. The opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda is the one that was just stated, and these Tanaim said, what is it? It's taught in the Brisa concerning the payment made by one who causes a pregnant woman to miscarry. So if you remember in Shemot chapter 21, verse 22, It describes a fight between two men in which a blow inadvertently falls onto a pregnant woman, and it causes her to miscarry the fetus. Remember, we learned this in 42b.
Yeah.
So the man responsible pays the father of the fetus, and he compensates the woman for her injury and pain. But what it's saying is here is that even though he has to pay that money, we deduct the fee for a midwife, because he would have had to pay a midwife if his wife came to term, and that would have been a fee that would have been incumbent on the husband. So we deduct that future fee. So Rabbi Yossi deducts from the damage paid to the husband the fee he would have otherwise had to pay for a midwife to assist in the child's delivery at term. So the attacker potentially saved the husband this money, and he doesn't have to pay it. In other words, as far as the woman is concerned, she suffers greater damages. So the attacker pays her injury and pain if she would have had a normal delivery with the assistance of a midwife. But you take off the extra fee. Then there is one other discussion, and it says we deduct the cost of the extra food she would have been privileged had her pregnancy been continued. So there would have been obstetrical fees, gynecological fees, and extra food and provisions and stuff. Those sort of things we deduct because it was a future that the husband didn't have to pay for. But don't get me wrong, he pays for the father of the fetus for the damage he caused, but we just deduct payments he saved. So the Gemara explains two opinions. The one who deduct the payment for the midwife, Rav Yossi, holds that we certainly deduct the cost of the extra food and provisions, and the one who says we deduct the cost of the extra food, which is Ben Azai, would rule, but we do not deduct the payment for the midwife, because the husband can say to the attacker, my wife is expert in giving birth and she would not have needed a midwife. In other words, he could have said, listen, we're not going to pay a midwife. She's done this like 6 times before. Or we would have got somebody to volunteer. So you can't deduct that sort of money. Okay. And that we're going to learn, Gavin. Just hang on a second. In Sotze 11b, we're going to learn that with Rabbi Simcha Steinhauer, that there's a contradiction because it says even a midwife needs a midwife to assist her in giving birth. So the only solution that the Gemara gives there is maybe you would have had a volunteering midwife. All we're saying in conclusion, just guys 1 minute, is that you pay for any damage you do. But anything that would have occurred as a result of your damage having saved the damaged party, like, for example, car insurance or a service fee or whatever the case may be, is deducted from what you have to pay.
Is it deducted or just not added in? Because otherwise, it sounds like you're losing. It sounds like you could lose.
Good question. As far as I know, as far as the case of the what we see with the midwife, it doesn't make sense necessarily to deduct that because the husband hasn't paid it yet. So, in other words, if he'd have paid it, I could understand deducting it because he would have lost out. Correct. So if you paid the midwife in advance, for like you get a special, like a take-a-lot special, what's that, the Groupon special, that you get a midwife, but you pay now and you get 6 free sessions and he paid up front, we deduct that, or we but if he hadn't paid for that, I don't know how it would practically work. The only thing of it is with the damage, including the weakening of the vine, that's easier to understand because that is a foregone conclusion, that the vine would be stronger. So in terms of this, I'm not sure. All we know is that that fact is taken into account. How it applies, Gavin, I don't know. I've got the same questions as you. All right, guys, have a good morning. Eh?
Yeah, thank you. You were actually very clear. I wonder if it's because there's a lot less people on